your source for everything paranormal. Para-X.
From Haunted Road Media comes an exciting new novel by author Marla Brooks. Soul Connection, a deadly obsession. Two lost souls, ripped apart by murder in another century, find each other again in the present, only to discover that the murderer has followed them through time. Can their love save them, or will history repeat itself? Find out in this captivating new novel by Marla Brooks, Soul Connection, a deadly obsession. Available now on Amazon.com and at BarnesandNoble.com.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Dark and cold winter long, they hold together in ancient song, waiting for the spring to set them free by oak and dash and rowan tree. And they dance all night till the sun does rise and spread its beams across the skies. Then they'll speak their secrets wise in the arms of the great stone circle. And if you go around Widdish in this fairy folk who live within, it's 9 times round you must dance and spin in the arms of the great stone circle. Light, light, a fire in the night, jump through the flames, see the flames burn bright, see the world through open sight in the arms of the great stone circle. She is round and look for you, then abound. What you seek for shall be found in the arms of the great stone circle. Come with me at Halloween and follow the march of the fairy queen. On everything hill she shall be seen in the arms of the great stone circle. And if you go around Widdish in this fairy folk who live within, it's 9 times round you must dance and spin in the arms of the great stone circle. Light, light, a fire in the night, jump through the flames as the flames burn bright, see the world through open sight in the arms of the great stone circle. Ancient song, waiting for the spring to set them free by oak and dash and rowan tree. And they dance all night till the sun does rise and spread its beams across the skies. Then they'll speak their secrets wise in the arms of the great stone circle. And if you go around Widdish in this fairy folk who live within, it's 9 times round you must dance and spin in the arms of the great stone circle. Light, light, a fire in the night, jump through the flames, see the flames burn bright, see the world through open sight in the arms of the great stone circle. Light, light, a fire in the night, jump through the flames as the flames burn bright, see the world through elfin sight in the arms of the great stone circle. Light, light, a fire in the night, jump through the flames as the flames burn bright, see the world through elfin sight in the arms of the great stone circle.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para-X Radio Network. First off, I want to wish everybody a blessed Ostara, the spring equinox. Now, Ostara celebrates the coming of spring, new growth and fertility, and it's also a time of new beginnings, which makes it a perfect time to put your thoughts into actions and do what needs to be done, whether it's business or personal, to make your life a little bit more comfortable place to live. And speaking of putting thoughts into actions, that's exactly what my guest tonight has done, and he did it quite well. Now, one of my favorite people, parapsychologist Dr. Ciaran O'Keeffe, is with us. And most of you know Ciaran as the parapsychologist and the voice of reason on the TV show Most Haunted, or from many of his other TV and media appearances. or his work in forensic psychology, or his school of parapsychology. He has a whole lot of hats, guys. But tonight, he's here to talk about a new project that he's doing on YouTube called Ghostlands, which he refers to as the macabre, shadow, creepy side of ghost hunting, which in of itself is a good reason to watch. Oh, but there's more. And with that being said, we'll dangle the carrot a little bit. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ciaran O'Keeffe. And Ciaran, welcome back, my long-lost friend.
Good evening, Marla. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's morning over there, so yes.
Morning for me. It's about 1 a.m. my time, but yes, it's lovely to speak to you again.
Well, I would nag you for being away for so long, but I know that over the past couple of years, you've not only been busy with your work, but you've also managed to fall in love, to get married to the lovely Anna, and you just both recently welcomed a new baby boy. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful. And thank you very much to all your listeners too, because lots of people have sent words of congratulations via Facebook and Twitter. So we're over the moon, and Gabriel, our son, is now just over 1 month old.
And he's beautiful from the pictures.
Thank you very much.
But he's got a beautiful mom, and you're okay too. So it's all good. But okay, so there's one more congratulation in order, because today, right now, where you are, is still tomorrow for me. But for you, today is your birthday, so have a very, very happy one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're an hour into my birthday. Wow.
Yeah. Ooh, is that an omen or what?
Of old age. That's brilliant. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, okay, I'm going to drag this out just a little bit longer because metaphorically, talking about birth and birthdays, you also gave birth yourself to a new project called Ghostlands, which I subscribed to immediately and have enjoyed the first 2 episodes. So that was kind of your natal thing for the year, huh? I know you've said that you've created the show. The reason was to show paranormal investigations that weren't bound by the rules and expectations of TV. You could choose your locations, your team, and all that. But you also said the series is about truth because you're in control.
Yeah.
Now, are you perhaps hinting that not all that people see on TV is completely truthful?
Well, it's partly that, but it's also partly motivation of paranormal shows. You know, people know me from Most Haunted and Jane Goldman Investigates, and I've worked with the guys from a number of these shows. But the difference is the motivation. So for paranormal television shows, the motivation is ultimately making a show. You know, what works on television? How does it, how can it appear on television? And so the truth of it can be left behind. And the perfect example I give is on Most Haunted, for any single episode, you may get 50, 60, 70 hours of footage that ultimately has to be broken down into about 50 minutes that appears on television. And from a producer's point of view, what makes the most interesting 50 minutes? Is it, a member of the team sitting with me in a darkened hallway in a, reputedly haunted hotel, and for that 50 minutes nothing happens? Well, for a television producer, they would never put that on air, because they know that ultimately they could lose the viewers, but also a TV producer isn't necessarily thinking like an investigator. And that's what I mean by, portraying the truth, because ultimately a 50-minute show will show the highlights, will be edited together to a point to make it more exciting than potentially it means, and also you run the risk, because the motivation is about making a show exciting, you run the risk, therefore, of people involved making it more exciting, rather than the ultimate aim that we all have of investigators, that is finding the truth. You don't go into a location with the end aim of producing a show. You go into a location with the end aim of assessing the evidence, finding out if, some of these eyewitness accounts are true, finding out if you can capture the evidence of a haunting. So that's the difference. It's all about motivation. And ultimately, the show with Ghostlands, it wasn't really about producing a show, although we've done that and it's on YouTube for people to see. It's more about us having done investigations at places we wanted to investigate, with a team we wanted to investigate, and then showing that, editing it together and showing an investigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, for those who may not have seen Ghostlands yet, I know I have my opinion on this, but how do you think it differs from the other shows, aside from what you just talked about, visually or investigation-wise? How might it differ to people that are used to seeing, Most Haunted or any of the other shows?
Well, we're talking about investigating at the end of the day, and there may be aspects of it that people will see in other shows. So there'll be the use of gadgets, which of course you see in Ghost Adventurers, you see in Ghost Hunters. Mm-hmm. So that's not new. The fact that we're using a team like Most Haunted, Ghost Adventurers, Paranormal State, you name it, that's not new. Maybe the difference is the focus, is that the investigators are focused on finding phenomena, trying to capture the phenomena that's experienced by previous eyewitnesses, and for that reason, the footage that you see is primarily footage of the location. So people are not pointing the camera at themselves. You get far less of that because at the end of the day, we want to see what the investigators are seeing. In addition to that, I wanted to show an element of, if phenomena was captured, how would you go about analysing it? Like what essentially would be my mindset about certain evidence? So how would I analyse it? How would I show it? What conclusions would I come up with? Even if those conclusions are saying, well, look, here's some evidence on the face of it. It looks interesting. It looks potentially paranormal. Now let's give you a brief analysis. Oh, here you go. Potentially, actually, it's not paranormal. And I think that's one of the main differences, is that we're showing evidence, we're showing stuff that's just normal. And I would hope that some parts of this, certainly in terms of the evidence gathering and the evidence analysis, is stuff that groups and investigators are doing out there anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's just maybe the part of TV shows, paranormal TV shows, that make us tear our hair out. Make us say, well, come on, it's obvious what it is, or why didn't you analyse it this way? And so I think that's possibly the main difference. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts too.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is in the beginning, when you start setting up equipment and stuff, you explain a lot more of what you're doing, which is what most people don't see. I mean, they might see on other shows, they're just kind of doing it for a second, but you explain it a little bit more in depth. Like when you talked about setting up the CCTV, that's the first thing you set up. And you explain why, not only because it needs to be done, but because it gives you more to watch and look at, even when nobody's around, kind of thing. So I think there's a lot more explanation to what you're doing, which is very helpful, I think. Yeah,
and I think part of it going into it, Anna and I had talked about this for a number of years, and a lot of the development of Ghostlands came out of people saying to me, well, you were in Most Haunted, that was one way of investigating or one way of portraying an investigation, but ultimately you didn't have control. How would you do things differently? And always the worry was, well, in terms of producing a TV show, I'm not a TV producer, but if I did things differently, it would be actually investigating, putting highlights of that or a package of that on the television or on the internet. But yes, explain to people, well, why are you using an EMF meter, and not specifically why are you using an EMF meter because it's allegedly a way of detecting ghosts. No, you're getting an insight into how I do things, my parapsychology background, but also as a career ghost hunter, my knowledge of scientific things like the EMF meter, like infrasound. All of these things will be explained to people. And like you say, the CCTV is a classic case. Often you see it being done in a setup for an investigation on a paranormal show, but very little explanation. And it was more a case of saying, well, look, there's a rationale, there's a logic to some of this, and the CCTV is a prime example as well. There's a lot of footage on Ghostlands which is CCTV, simply because that was the CCTV system is not set up for TV purposes. It's set up because that's how you do an investigation. You have investigators in a location, but number one, to show if there's anybody else in the area that shouldn't be in the area that might be causing noises or the phenomena to occur, you can capture that on CCTV. It's essentially an anti-fraud device, if you will. But also, in addition to that, you're getting then lots of different angles if phenomena does occur. Right. I think that's the benefit. And that's also the benefit in terms of people who stick with Ghostlands, although we haven't uploaded anything recently, but a little baby has got in the way of that happening. But it just means that we've got further analysis that's being done on phenomena that has appeared on the first 2 episodes, and that'll start showing itself in little analysis packages on the YouTube channel, so that people see further analysis, and also get feedback from viewers as well, and act on that feedback.
Which I think is really important, because if you're doing for a regular TV show, the production company won't let you say anything. Everybody's got their own way of doing things, but oftentimes feedback from people that are watching is very important. It could be something you didn't think about, something that maybe you needed some validation about. I mean, it could be a lot of things. So I think making it interactive in that way is very, very clever.
Well, a prime example would be in putting together episode 1. Wanted to make it interesting. It's only about 20 minutes, which of course represents a number of visits to a location to investigate it with the team. Presented a 20-minute package, but at the same time wanted it to be interesting for people, and so gave the science side, but also the macabre side. But with the macabre side, we threw in some music to create more of an atmosphere. But immediately the response to episode 1 from a lot of viewers was, loved it, great. Can you lose some of the music? Because we're not hearing everything the investigators are doing. And you know what we did for episode 2? Cut out the music.
See?
Because we have that, like you say, we have that luxury. We don't need to answer to producers or directors. We are essentially running it ourselves. And so in the same way, for episode 3, we will react to what people are saying about episode 2. So people go to the YouTube channel and they make their comments underneath the video, and we actually pay attention to those, and we present it differently, unless of course you get comments like, can you make it look more like Most Haunted? It's not really helpful. You're missing the point if they say stuff like that.
Yeah, well, some people are just creatures of habit. They just don't like change at all. You said one of the things that's very important is that you want to let the evidence speak.
Yeah.
Now, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because some people might think we're talking about EVP or something.
No, it's, if anything, it's a basic definition of true skepticism. People often confuse me because of my TV persona of being a cynic, and they use the word skeptic when they're actually describing a cynic, and that's somebody who's closed-minded, who's not going to listen to alternative viewpoints. But as you know, and people who I've interacted with know, I'm a skeptic in the true sense of the word, which is that I'm always questioning. I'm open-minded, but ultimately I'm letting the evidence speak. And that's where that phrase comes from, and that's the foundation for Ghostlands, is letting the evidence speak. And in the format of the episodes, you actually see, we kind of grouped it because of the length of the episodes being about 20-25 minutes, and that'll be extended with future episodes. You're kind of seeing three kind of groups of evidence, three types of evidence presented, which of course is not everything, but it's things that were interesting in terms of looking through the footage, or if the investigators highlighted any moments that were interesting, or if there's any recordings, so audio recordings, which could be EVPs, anything like that, and also any environmental data that's interesting. So, for example, for episode 3, there's going to be some evidence which actually is environmental data, and this is all stuff that, in analysing it, the team going through all of this have said, you know what, that's evidence. That could be something. Mm-hmm. So let's present that as let the evidence speak. Let's first of all present it and then analyse it. And if the evidence is speaking and saying, look at me, I'm potentially something paranormal, then following analysis, it should be potentially something paranormal, which is why you've got the end of episode 1 showing some visual footage or visual phenomena that, after replaying it, after slowing it down, after looking at alternative viewpoints, after thinking about shadows, various things, it's the evidence has spoken. The evidence has said, look, here you go, and the Ghostlands team can't fully explain it.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, I've got one of these wonky questions that might make you think or just laugh at me and shake your head. But there's another phrase of yours that you use that is, evidence is not necessarily proof.
Yes.
Now, in ghost hunting, in any kind of paranormal thing, I'm not sure that there is ever 100% conclusive proof. Because it's an unknown. No matter how you pull your hair out and try to figure it out, we just don't know exactly. So what constitutes proof?
Well, that's the thing, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of when would it ever be proof, and maybe it's proof in terms of your belief system.
Okay.
I could present some evidence, as I've done on Ghostlands, present some evidence, analyse it, and then at the end say, well, I've analysed it, I've looked at all the normal explanations, and I've shown it to be none of those. And so therefore, we could say it's paranormal. And it would be down to kind of your belief system, how you approach things, to say, well, if it's none of the other explanations, then it must be paranormal, and therefore, in my belief system, I have a belief about what ghosts are, what ghostly phenomena is, so therefore it's proof for me of that belief system. And a prime example would be, at a very basic level, ghosts are departed spirits. They're people who have died and passed on, and they're coming back in some form to either show themselves, to communicate, or they're a replay of their presence when they were here on Earth. Mm-hmm. And so that could be a belief system. Now, if the evidence is that there's some visual phenomena that occurs in a haunted location, that's the evidence. The analysis has been done to show there's no other normal explanations. I would then say it's paranormal. Fitting in with my belief system, I would then say, okay, it's paranormal, but it's therefore proof for me that we have departed spirits coming back to visit and try and communicate. Mm-hmm. So I think it's potentially all about belief system, but I think you're absolutely right. Evidence does not necessarily guarantee proof. And I think I reiterate that phrase quite a few times, just because a lot of investigators out there present their evidence and they say this is evidence of the paranormal. But from my perspective, and it's interesting from your perspective too, is how can we ever prove aspects of the paranormal? Unless it's a subjective proof, unless it ties in with our belief, and it's part of my feelings about mediumship too. I've mentioned this before on the show years ago when we were chatting about testing mediums, and people know that for my PhD, I tested mediums in a laboratory, for example, in terms of can they actually communicate with the dead. I was looking at ways of controlling that, showing that if they were successful, mediums were successful, the only explanation could be communicating with the dead. Well, coming out of that PhD, my conclusion was there's no way that you could ever prove that a medium is communicating with the dead. Even in a laboratory, there's no way you could actually do that. Because if a medium came up with information about a departed relative or a sitter in another location, for example, which is the way I like to set things up, if they came up with that information, how can you verify whether the medium is actually communicating with the dead, or that they've picked up the information telepathically from the sitter, or that they've accessed, some other form, so they've accessed maybe the Akashic records or gone to another plane, and accessed information that's available for mediums to tap into. All of those are paranormal explanations, but should a medium come up with the information in the laboratory, we don't know which one of those explanations it could be. They're all fantastic. They're all amazing. They're all paranormal and they are all phenomenal. But we don't know which one it'll be. And so therefore, we can't say, from my perspective, that we can ever prove mediumship. Certainly in the laboratory, we can't prove it. However, people could have readings with a medium and they can get personal information, and because of their belief, because of the personal experience they've had, they would say, no, I received proof from that medium. They could communicate with my departed relative. And that's what I mean about it being subjective and belief.
Yes.
In circumstance, it's down to the sitter, and maybe that's the same for experiencing haunting and poltergeist phenomena. It's personal, it's subjective, and down to your belief.
And the word paranormal is kind of an umbrella catchphrase too. All it means is not normal, but then what's normal? I mean, everybody's normal, again, is subjective, so...
Also, as a parapsychologist, we know the definition of parapsychology is the scientific study of experiences, which, if they are as they seem to be, are in principle outside the realm of human capabilities as presently conceived by conventional scientists. That's the definition of parapsychology, and it ties into exactly what you've just said. We're dealing with paranormal, but it's outside of the normal, but of course those experiences may be perfectly normal, for a huge percentage of people. Who's to say what's normal and who's to say what's paranormal?
Exactly. So it's just like this very big mishmash, and we all have to treat it to our own belief systems and experiences, I guess. It's the simplest way I can think to put it. Now, you were also speaking, I was reading this, that you say that present-day parapsychologists frequently fall into one of two camps, either process-oriented or proof-oriented. Are you one or the other, or somewhere in between, or have you not chosen sides?
That's really good question. I guess I'm falling somewhat in between. And just to clarify for your readers, a proof-oriented parapsychologist would be somebody who is looking for proof of some parapsychological phenomena, and that could be telepathy or precognition, which is predicting the future, or PK, psychokinesis, or some form of after-death communication, whether that's mediumship or haunting experiences. And so the one camp is proof-oriented, looking for proof of that stuff in the laboratory. The process-oriented parapsychologists begin from a standpoint that the phenomena exists, that we have, and here I'm going to use this word, controversial word, we have scientific proof that this stuff exists, that it has been proven in the laboratory. And so some parapsychologists begin from that standpoint, that this stuff definitely exists, and what they're trying to do is to look at the conditions under which these things happen at their best, kind of optimally. And a good example would be telepathy, mind-to-mind communication. If I was a process-oriented parapsychologist, I would say telepathy exists. Now I want to test under which circumstance it happens best. So I'm going to test, for example, twins, because anecdotally we know twins have better telepathic experiences than people who don't know each other. And so I might then test twins in the laboratory. So I'm looking for the process under which things happen better. Another prime example of telepathy would be a good stream of research that happened in Edinburgh about 20 years ago, looking at creative people, showing that creatives were better telepathically than non-creatives. And by that I mean artists, musicians, that sort of group, and a whole stream of research by a lady called Kathy Dalton in Edinburgh, looking at exactly that. So that's process-oriented. Now, I'm, kind of pushing me into a corner and saying which one of those.
Oh, me? Would I ever do that to you? Oh my goodness! All right, sorry.
I was waiting for it. So I think I exist. I sit now between those two camps, but in terms of the proof-oriented part, coming at it from a very different perspective, and that is saying, look, this phenomena definitely exists. So people are definitely having haunting experiences. They're definitely having telepathic experiences. That's undoubtedly the case. However, we can't simply explain away all haunting experiences as being down to hallucination or fraud, which is the trendy way of cynically explaining these experiences from various psychologists who I know and various scientists and cynics generally. Oh, it's all hallucination, it's all fraud. I don't think that's the case at all, and I think it's my responsibility or our responsibility as scientists to look into exactly what's happening. And I think at the moment there are various aspects to this that still remain unanswered, and there are various cases that are fascinating enough that'll make you think, well, they cannot be explained away as easily as we want. So that's kind of the proof-oriented part of where I come from. The process-oriented part of where I come from is essentially saying, yes, this phenomena exists, but maybe with haunting experiences, which is my area of specialty, and maybe with mediumship experiences too, maybe there's circumstances under which these things tend to happen more so. And that, because of my stream of research at the moment, has focused more on the skeptical circumstances under which it happens more so. So are there environmental circumstances under which haunting experiences can happen more so, or psychological, a psychological context to it, the same way with mediumship. That's kind of where I am at the moment, but there's also another part of it, which is potentially doing this research is maybe saying, well, yes, there might be particular circumstances under which haunting and poltergeist experiences can happen that are down to the individual being more empathic, having a more open-minded belief system, being able to tune in some way. And so part and parcel of the research that I'm conducting at the moment might be that the end aim is showing, or the outcome is showing, these things are potentially paranormal, these haunting and poltergeist experiences, and there are circumstances under which they happen more so than others, but it's not a normal thing, it's a paranormal thing.
Mm-hmm. Back to the word.
Yes,
so, yeah.
You want to get away from it somehow.
I don't think there's any way. I just think it's going to be there always until there is proof positive, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So in other words, it's going to be there always, and it's a good word. All right. So what criteria for choosing locations do you have? I mean, do you have a running list of possibilities that you've been jotting down over the years when you've heard of some place interesting? How are you picking these locations for the show?
I think it's exactly that. Part of the criteria for choosing locations has come from investigating them in the past. Mm-hmm. So a prime example would be the first location we did, the Second World War bunker. Mm-hmm. One of the Channel Islands, an investigation, a location that I've visited a number of times before. And I think, so partly having investigated it and seen that it's a location that I would like to investigate further. Uh-huh. But then I've investigated it further, but then kind of a bonus of it is saying, well, why don't I have the cameras running while I'm doing this? Because it's a location that I love in terms of eyewitness experiences, in terms of even how it looks too. Mm-hmm. But here's a location I love. I'm going to investigate it again with the Ghostlands team, so why not just have the cameras running? And then show people around the world, here's a location that I love, and hopefully as a result of the investigation, you can see why. So that's kind of the main criteria, is showing investigations of places that I love, places I wanted to investigate. And the episode 2, actually, the theatre, the new theatre Oxford, is another example, but from a slightly different perspective. Here's a location where I'd wanted to investigate for many years. I knew about the location. I'd spoken to staff on a number of occasions. I knew it had a very good reputation for being haunted in terms of people's experiences, whether it's people visiting the location as theatre goers or as members of staff, and everything from cleaners, box office staff, stagehands, up to management. And so a location that ultimately delivers in terms of the eyewitness account, and repeatable, independent eyewitness accounts. And so that would be a criteria as well, finding a location like that that also has never been investigated before. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that for any investigator is a little bit of the Holy Grail. We're suffering as investigators at the moment because of shows, paranormal shows. It doesn't matter what they are, and Most Haunted that I've been part of is as guilty as any of them. In investigating locations, they are immediately shown on television, and of course then what happens is then every group wants to then go and investigate that location. And what tends to happen is one of two things. Either, from a skeptical perspective, the original accounts which drew groups to that location are lost in kind of the dearth of experiences that group members will have and mediums will have. And so, you the first or second group that goes and visits a location, they'll have a particular experience, and then the following group will try and investigate that experience rather than tackling the original eyewitness accounts that would have brought a group there. In addition, if a medium then comes up with information who's part of that group, that then kind of forms the folklore of a location, that the medium had the experience, and so it's almost as though it's written in stone. And I think for investigators that can be frustrating, because then it's teasing out, well, what are the real accounts versus what are accounts from other people who have subsequently visited and maybe not done an investigation the way we wanted to do. So that's one thing that can happen. Now there's another thing that can happen, and you're potentially going to laugh that I'm saying this, but I think this kind of ties in maybe your belief and the belief of a lot of your listeners, is that if you get a location that is just inundated with groups, there's a sense that, and I've spoken to some very quite spiritual people about this, and David Wells as well, who you and I both know very well. Mm-hmm. This sense that if a place is investigated, it can be, I hesitate to use the phrase, it can be
overfished.
Overfished, I was going to say investigated to death.
Better yet, yeah.
Where it can be a place that was reputedly haunted, that the initial visitors would say, yeah, there's something here, there's some atmosphere, or this phenomena repeatedly happens, but because of repeated visits and hundreds of visits from various groups over the years, it's kind of lost it. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what the explanation for that is. I don't know if it's a case of scaring the ghosts away, or they're getting bored of performing all the time. I don't know, but it's something that I have seen at a few locations, or at least spoken to the owners and spoken to the original investigators, and got that sense that, yeah, it can happen. You can get locations that at one point, appear to be haunted, but then for the influx of investigators, for some reason, they lose it.
Well, David said that in regards to when Most Haunted came to the States and did the Winchester House. David said there were spirits there, but they could care less. They were tired of it. They just weren't around. And in fact, he said if he had been sent out to the location prior, which he had usually done for other shows, he would not have suggested that everybody come out there, because technically, he said it was just very difficult because, the spirits that were there, some of them, of course, weren't, but the ones that were there just were bored, like you said.
Yeah, and I think, I'm a scientist, and a rational scientist and a skeptic, but I think there's a certain logic to the idea of how many times, if you're a ghost in a location, how many times can you hear an investigator come in and say, if there's anybody there, can you make a noise? And then you make a noise, and you are asked to perform on a nightly basis, essentially. And I can understand the logic to it of just saying, well, they've just gone away. They've just given up performing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not really a dog and pony show, but sometimes. And then the other thing is that some of the people that own these locations and rent them out, they turn, if it's their home, they turn it from a home into a tourist attraction. Sure. Or they just make it a tourist attraction anyway.
Yes.
And it's hard to take that seriously. I mean, as you said, you love to go places that haven't been investigated before. And that was the Holy Grail. Well, it was the Holy Grail for me when I was writing my Ghosts of Hollywood series, because I pointedly went to places that nobody had ever heard of or hadn't been investigated. And we got wonderful things there, beautiful things, because it was new, it was fresh. It made such a difference. I love looking for the odd things, not the mundane, everyday, everybody knows a thing. And in fact, we have a question in the chat room from Ceiling Cat. This is where that came from. She wonders if it's harder doing research on places with so much varied history, because, well, she says, can most of these claims be documented?
That's a very good point, and certainly would be looking for a history of eyewitness accounts that are verifiable. And so the theatre is a prime example for a location that has a history going back, I would argue, maybe about 100 years. Prior to that, there are, of course, other things on that location. But in terms of eyewitness accounts, you've got various accounts going back about 100 years, but the oldest of those would be a member of staff who's in her late 80s, who's recently retired, box office staff. And if you have her experience and you can talk to her, then you've got a good history of that account. Mm-hmm. You've got, you're hearing the account firsthand. Whereas the worry with the theatre, especially for that particular individual who highlighted that there was a figure seen in a particular area of the auditorium, the difficulty with her was the worry that we were only hearing the account from management. who may have their own motivation for telling the experience, but ultimately it's not a tourist attraction for its ghosts. So we weren't so worried about that. But ultimately you get a situation of Chinese whispers, we call it in the UK. This telephone game. Telephone game. There we go. And so the story gets handed from one person to the other, and parts get exaggerated, parts get lost, and so therefore it's very difficult to investigate on the basis of eyewitness accounts going back decades, unless you can speak to the original person, or in the case of locations like Mary King's Close in Edinburgh, an underground street, or Hampton Court Palace is another one. Unless you get these accounts written down very soon after they happened. And Hampton Court Palace, for me, is one of the best places for that. You've got accounts going back almost 300 years, but they are accounts that were written down very quickly after they happened, over the course of the 300 years. So they're written down in people's diaries, and there's a great curator there, a guy called Ian Franklin, who has accumulated these stories from their original sources, as in diaries and books and visitor books from Hampton Court Palace, so that you can actually see that. And that's a great example of history of accounts that you can actually investigate rather than hearing them secondhand.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned about somebody, a modern day account of somebody seeing something in the theater, for example, it may not have any historical significance. It may be, if you believe in spirits and ghosts, it may be somebody just popped in for the night and went away. So while you could definitely report it as an incident, it just may be a one-time thing.
Yes, absolutely. It could just be a one-time thing, and another holy grail of investigating is having a phenomena that happens in a location that's repeatable. It's happened to a number of different people over the years, but yes, you might get one very convincing experience that just happens, once, just happens as a one-off. And it also becomes then a little bit of a detective story if you're interested to know the origin of that phenomena, or who's responsible for it, or who the figure is that's seen. And that's one reason why I was quite keen to work with Tim and Amy from Paranormal Intelligence Gathering Service, two investigators on the Ghostlands team, because the group was ultimately formed by police officers, ex-police officers, who have kind of that investigative way of approaching things. And for investigations that they do outside of Ghostlands, one thing they look at is if a figure is seen, or voices are heard, or particular phenomena is heard in a location, then ultimately they are looking for the suspect in a case. They see that figure, or they see the phenomena, and who's responsible for the phenomena as being a suspect, and it's their investigation that needs to reveal who is the most likely suspect that could be that figure. And so it's a case of them trawling the historical records, trawling the eyewitness accounts to see if there's any other information about the figure, anything they wore, so that they can kind of designate at least what period in history they came from, and then who the visitors to the location would have been. And ultimately, at the end of their investigations, which can last for months and months and months, coming up with the most likely suspect for who that person is, which I think is another approach to investigation. Yeah, and there are so many different approaches that you could flip a coin and keep on going. Yes, but absolutely you could. I mean, the Ghostlands is showing that there's a couple of approaches. There's the approach of just having investigators in a location, and often investigators in a location who may not be fully aware of the phenomena that's experienced, and just seeing if they experience the phenomena, even if it's as slight as reporting a temperature drop, which is quite reliable. And then on the other side of it, because you have all the gadgets, so you have the kind of scientific or more so the environmental monitoring side of things, and seeing whether that ties in with previous locations, even to the point where in future episodes you may get, and now hold yourself, you may get the appearance of the magic torch.
Oh, be still my heart. Yes, okay. I was wondering, with all the new modern equipment that you have, whether, your magic torch had been retired, or...
There's always room for the magic torch, and there's always room for a updated, more technologically advanced magic torch. So watch this space. Okay, that gave me a bug in my ear. I'm going to have to watch very, very carefully for it. I hope I still recognize it with all the new updates. I'm sure you will.
Yeah, I know. It rubs off. It sticks, doesn't it? So, all right. So, when do you have any idea when episode 3 may be available?
Well, we're currently analysing the footage from the investigation now. Mm-hmm. Got a few interesting things that we're looking at in terms of some of the phenomena that's occurred, and revisiting with some of the eyewitness accounts, and actually revisiting the location at a different time of day to see if the phenomena repeats itself. So we're doing that at the moment, starting to edit the third episode. So we're kind of hoping that we can get it done by potentially the end of May. I'm off to Australia for a paranormal convention mid-May, so in an ideal world we'd get it done by then. But even if we don't get the third episode done by then, what we aim to do is, at least over the next month or so, at least upload additional videos, whether that's analysis or viewers are aware that there are we've got them little clips called perspectives, where you get the investigator's perspective, the medium's perspective. So one thing we might do in the next month is upload my perspective. And so they'll have the parapsychologist perspective, and then also potentially a historian's perspective. So there's definitely more to come.
I'm looking forward to it, and just so people know that, the ones that say, why can't this be more like Most Haunted? Tidbit, episode 2, if you haven't seen it, people, has a couple of people you will recognize from Most Haunted. Kath is there, Leslie is there, right?
Yes, that's right. And also Chris Conway, who was a medium briefly.
Yes.
Most Haunted makes his appearance there as well.
Yes, so something for people to run and do it. So how do people subscribe, and where do they find it?
If you go to YouTube and type in Ghostlands Online, you can find the channel that way, or simply type in the web address www.youtube.com/Ghostlands Online, and you'll find it that way. You'll find the videos, and then it's quite easy to subscribe from that. You'll see the subscribe button. So that's one route. The other route is there's a Ghostlands Facebook page, so you can search for that, or there's a web address, a website, which is www.ghostlands.co.uk, where you can actually see some more information about the series, some more information about parapsychology and about definition of hauntings and poltergeist, that sort of thing. And we'll be uploading some more information to that website over the next few weeks. So check back on that.
And any hint about where episode 3 will be taking place?
We're giving so much away.
Okay, we don't have to, but,
I won't say exactly where it is, other than episode 3, dynamically, in terms of the location. The first episode was a Second World War bunker. The second location is an old theatre. The third location is completely different to those two. A smaller venue, a location we spent a lot of time at, but also a location that has a history associated with the Napoleonic War, with the incarceration of French soldiers, and also potentially treatment of victims of leprosy. And so
interesting.
It's a very, very interesting location. There's kind of mixed reports from people going back many years as to whether we're dealing with a positive location or a negative in terms of the emotional association with the location. So it's really exciting. We've waited a while to try and get into the location. We managed to do it just before Christmas, and like I said, we've been analysing the footage ever since.
Wow, that sounds exciting. And you're also doing now some public investigations. You're doing lecturing. You are still running the School of Parapsychology, yes?
That's right.
How's that?
Yes.
Is the 2014 I can't even think of the word. All right. Are you when do the courses start? See, you mentioned that silly torch and you got me going.
I'm so distracted now.
Yes.
Just thinking about me and my magic torch. The School of Parapsychology is still ongoing. There's been a little bit of delay recently with the baby appearing, but there's currently a class in session. You can go to the schoolofparapsychology.org and find information there, or there's the School of Parapsychology Facebook page for more information. And so that's ongoing. There's a spring course that's due to start actually the beginning of April. Foundations course and intermediate course. So that's starting. Part of that is improved in terms of more streamlined, providing more information, and some of the information, kind of behind the scenes information about Ghostlands and some of the phenomena that you wouldn't necessarily see in the show on YouTube, because we just don't have the time to show everything. Some of that phenomena is discussed in the chat room tutorials as part of the Foundations of Parapsychology course. So that's still ongoing, and various things. I've got a book coming up the end of the year, kind of timed for Halloween, called If I Were a Ghost, which is asking for people's to finish that phrase. So if I say, if I were a ghost, how would you finish that phrase? And it started off with kind of a light desire to know what people would say, but actually it's turned into a huge project now, and I've got actors, musicians, soldiers, politicians, famous, not famous. A huge array of people have answered that particular question with some fascinating responses. So maybe I can come back later on in the year and talk about that.
Oh, please. That sounds fantastic. Because it's got to be so much fun to just go through the answers in of themselves. Yeah. So, yes.
And amazing also that you get some people that declare themselves as cynics, and actually their responses tie into a completely different belief system.
Well, good. If it's towards the end of the year, that means you can't stay away for another 3 years. So that's a good thing. This is a good thing. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a night owl and sacrificing some sleep tonight. And I know I'm looking forward to the next episode of Ghostlands and the further adventures of Dr. Ciaran O'Keeffe. So, like I said, if you must disappear, don't let it be so long for the next time. Deal?
I won't at all. It's an absolute deal. Thank you so much, Marla, for having me on. And yeah, I will see you. I'll speak to you again very soon, but definitely this year.
Okay, good. All right, and thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And until next time, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.